you doing, Wade?
Life is good, Rob. How's life treating you today?
Really interesting. It's Ghost Month out here in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia, which basically they say that in Chinese tradition, all the ghosts of hell were released for 1 month and they could roam around and all this weird shit happens. So who better to have as a guest than a specialist in Enochian magic, an author of interesting books like the Mystical Heptarchia and the Great Tables, Thelemite, which is your area. And welcome to the show, Thelemite, Enochian author, and of course, all-around amazing dude, Mr. Scott Michael Stenwick. Mr. Stenwick, welcome.
Thanks. It's good to be here. Morning.
Oh, all right. So, I'm really, really amazed by the amount of you've put into clarifying the practice of Enochian, which is one of the more obscure practices in Western occultism. From all these topics, what was it that, inspired you into Enochian and writing books about it?
Well, originally, I've been interested in magic and occultism for a while. When I was in college, I had a professor and I took a class with them on like the magic of the Renaissance. We talked about Dee, Agrippa, Bruno, primarily, kind of the three big figures. And I was fascinated by the story of John Dee tried to, come up with his own system of magic. And so I started researching it more, and that got me into Enochian and, studying the diaries and stuff like that. People who have read the Dee diaries did so while working as a security guard. It's kind of interesting because they're very long, and you are allowed to read when you're a security guard. So you get through the stuff. So I got through, all the stuff in the Dee diaries. And then I'm like, okay, so this is pretty interesting. So how does it work? And then I looked at, some of these other authors, like, there was stuff like the Schulers out there, which wasn't, the Schulers material isn't really very good. Their first book, Practical Enochian Magic, is kind of okay if you know absolutely nothing. It's like a bare minimum introduction. And you want to work like Golden Dawn style with the system. And the other book that was available at the time was Enochian Evocation by Jeffrey James. That came out in 1983. And so I've got a hold of a copy of James, and I'm like, okay, this is more what I'm looking for. This is like kind of laid out more like a grimoire kind of thing, whereas they're making a lot of assumptions over here in the Schuler stuff. And then, some of the other Golden Dawn stuff that just doesn't line up with the diaries. It's like, well, they put this whole other layer on top of it that makes it much more complex and actually changes some of the attributions around. And it's very much its own thing. If you look at a number of authors have pointed this different, it doesn't use the table. It doesn't use the setup. It uses the Great Table itself as kind of a magical tool. It breaks it up into tablets that you hang on separate walls. You don't do that in the diary. A bunch of stuff like that is just completely different. Okay, and so many of the Golden Dawn techniques are, you're basically just doing some ceremonial forms and you're like going into the spirit vision, doing stuff astrally and things like that. Whereas with more of the Dee purist approach, so to speak, you've got the equipment, you've got the table, you're doing conjurations and these kinds of things. And it works a little bit more like what you see today with grimoire magic. And so I kind of, with Thelemite, I am interested in that system. So I do use ceremonial forms and stuff like that, like you see in the books. But the attributions I use are all pretty much out of the diaries. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what I try to do. I try not to have anything in the system the way I write it that contradicts things that are in Dee's diaries. So I try to line it all up and then I add more modern pieces to it. And so I developed that approach, over a number of years. And, I tested it, for practical results. The way I published in the book, that seems to be the way it works the best for me anyway. I can't necessarily vouch for other people's experiences with the book, so I really appreciate that.
All right.
A lot of the, with Enochian, I've seen a lot of, it lends itself easily to becoming more and more complex. And I've seen people actually using the complexity as its own magical tool, which is funny because it really only works for the person doing it. Crowley even made fun of Arthur Edward Waite in Moonchild. He created his character that had these long, incomprehensible incantations in bad Latin.
Edwin Arthwaite.
Edwin Arthwaite, yes. I've actually worked with a couple Enochian magicians who did it exactly like that, where it would take 10 hours to perform this entire working. It was insane.
Yeah, that's a question, Mr. Stenwick, if you don't mind me asking. The question is this. One of the things I've read, because I've read some of the basic texts, like I've read Lon Milo's Enochian Vision Magic, Tyson's work on Enochian Magic for beginners, which is definitely not for beginners. This is not for beginners. How important are the tools of Enochian? It's like, are you of the belief that you could make it work for you without the tools, or are you of the belief that if you're going to even bother with this, you've got to invest time, money, and energy to at least forming a basic set of tools?
You can make it work without the tools. You can fragmentary temple setup. When I was starting out, I was still able to get some results. I mean, as you get the temple setup gets better, it seems like it works better. So if you've got more stuff, it's better to have that. I mean, especially if you're doing practical stuff, like you're looking at like probability shifts in the material world and stuff like that. It's going to work better if you've got all the stuff. But you can get in touch with the entities and you can work with it with a fairly minimal temple setup. I mean, if you look at Crowley's Vision and the Voice, that's, from the standpoint of, the quality of the text, it's quite good in terms of what he's receiving in terms of information. And he was actually doing that Golden Dawn style. He had this rose cross with a topaz in the center. He just stuck it on his forehead and then just went into the spirit vision to scry. And he didn't use a ring. He didn't use a table. He didn't have anything. And the material there he got, though, was really good. So it's like, yes, it does. Yes, it does work without the tools. And the other thing I urge people to do is, try to do it as best you can. I talk about in Mystical Heptarchy how here are some simple things you could do to get things that'll basically work. Like, you could make, you could draw, a table onto something, and the sigillum, you can print this out, you can put it on wood. It doesn't necessarily have to be, beeswax or whatnot. I have a lot of simplification suggestions in there. But magic, until you've spent thousands of dollars on equipment, is just terrible, frankly. It's a way to say, oh yeah, you just shouldn't actually do the practice. Well, you should do the practice as soon as 3 years getting my temple ready, and now I'm finally going to do it. It's like, what were you doing those 3 years? You really should have started to go ahead and do the work. So I definitely recommend people improvise a temple as best they can. Try to get as many of the pieces together as you can before you start practicing.
But it definitely, though, is important, because I've had some people who dabbled around with it and they think that, oh, I'm practicing Enochian because I'm saying the keys. And I'm like, okay, of course, the recitation of keys is very much important as part of the practice. But I was like, well, have you even tried to improvise a ring? Have you even tried to improvise a table? And that's why I was asking that question, because can you do it standalone outwards in Enochian, or would those tools greatly affect the experience, even on an improvised level? Because Duquette says that if you can't having ring, what more of the gold one?
Right. I'm not suggesting that if you easily can improvise stuff, you shouldn't bother. I'm not saying that either. I'm saying that you can improvise stuff with relatively limited effort. It's not that hard to do, and you can certainly practice with something like that. You don't need to have the solid gold ring and the sweetwood table designed completely to spec and stuff like that. That's more what I mean.
I get it. I totally get it.
I think if it's easy to do something, it's like, well, you kind of should do it. You know what I mean? But instead of if you oh, but it has to be perfect, that's the problem.
Yeah.
I've seen, the tools are really just there to increase your leverage. I've seen people that they have a whole garage full of tools, and they, to fix their car, and someone else can fix it with a hanger and get the same job done. It really depends on what you're trying to do and how well you know what you're doing.
I mean, my own experience with
definitely. And part of doing the practice.
Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say that, yeah, I mean, as far as, and when you get to know the system by working with it. So that's kind of where I'm saying, you want to start practicing as soon as possible. You want to get to the point where you know it as well as you can, as soon as you can, instead of, I built all this stuff, but I haven't actually done anything. That's more what
I get it. Yeah, you don't want to be like a prop collector. You actually want to be a person who uses it, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Because like my own experience when it comes to practicing Enochian was very much true that you have to actually use the tools, not just spend the whole time creating them. But it was kind of like a radio that the more complete the set was, the clearer the transmission would be. So like when I would set up the table, I would set up the ensign of creation and stuff like that and everything, and the sigil and the transmission and the experience a lot more intense versus if there was nothing at all. So that was the value of it. It wasn't completely necessary, but it did make it. Which brings me to my next question. This is a personal question about the Enochian practice, but this is straight into the deep end. I've asked in a lot of forums of the tablet of Nalvage, and I've gotten a lot of highfalutin answers. And I wanted to ask a specialist, what would you use it for? What's the use? I mean, a lot of people have debated it's for this, it's for that, it's a macrocosm of creation, blah, blah, blah. But I'd like to speak in layman's terms. What does a specialist use the tablet of?
I don't use it.
He doesn't use it.
That's my answer. I don't use it in ritual. It's, from it, if it is to be used or how to use it from the diaries, it is, we don't have an example of it in the D collection. Nobody ever saw an example of it in John Dee's equipment. Apparently, like Elias Ashmole saw the Holy Table, it doesn't exist anymore. There's really not a lot of evidence out there for what you do with it. It looks like, so it's a table that, I mean, they use it to derive some of the names and stuff like that, where the angels were telling Kelly, like, where on the table things were and stuff like that. But, and, for the beginning of that may be why so many people are debating over, all this kind of stuff, because you can pretty much project anything onto that you want and try to look at, okay, well, they say this about it in the diary, so maybe that implies this. And that's a thing that is true about the diaries that I do find a little annoying about some other Enochian authors. This is a good segue into it, in that there are authors who research the diaries, and you get into the diaries, you're reading through it like, hey, well, this might mean this or it might mean that, and you have to decide. Okay, well, what do I think this means? Well, I think it means this one over here. Then you keep going through the diaries. Here's another one. Okay, well, now I've got to decide, does it mean this or does it mean this? And so it's like this tree that you have to walk down reading through the diaries. And there are authors out there who, well, they which is just this whole tree of interpretations. And they're not willing to really come out and say, well, yeah, this is my interpretation of it based on this. They say, no, this is the way it is, and you're an idiot if you make any different decision than me. And it's like, that really is not a good way to analyze anything.
Fascinating, very fascinating.
So it's kind of like the third book of the Lesser Key of Solomon, where he gives a lot of instruction on exactly how to compose these little talismans, and no idea what they're for and no examples of how to use them. It's just kind of extra information that got,
Right,
it's the orphan book of the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like, well, you're kind of supposed to know, if you're a magician, right? You presumably studied with somebody, and they say, well, this is what you do with it. But yeah, it is interesting because it doesn't survive in text. You've got, this is probably some kind of oral tradition if it existed at all, And you got people say, oh, well, this is absolutely how it is. And you're completely wrong if you draw any other conclusion. It's like, yeah, you really need to be more open-minded than that. You really need to work with, what the data is. If somebody says, well, actually it's this, okay, well, I'll try that. And, what happens? And, oh, well, this works really well. Well, I'll keep it then, kind of thing.
All right, it actually brings me to my next question I wanted to ask. Within the practice of Enochian, there are some, I like to call them pseudo-initiatory things there, like the 19-day working and the Gebofal, which is like days of constant temple work, meditation, scrying, etc. From your point of view as an expert in the topic, are these practices Enochian equivalent of like an Abramelin experience? Or are these in itself something completely different that like it's something like to get the higher levels of Enochian to practice?
Well, okay, so it's you could say that it's a little bit like an Abramelin type thing. However, there are some differences. First of all, it's shorter for one thing. Second of all, you can conjure anything in the system without doing it. I haven't come across anything where over the years of, back in the day, even when I was starting out, you can conjure up anything. There really is, it really doesn't seem to be that huge a difference whether you've done it or not done it, which is kind of interesting. At one point I thought there would be. It seems like if you, and also the other thing that is interesting, here's an example where you could read some. James has it as an 18-day operation. And if you read the text a different way, it's a 15-day operation. So the thing is that it depends on how you read in the diaries, what you're doing with the days of prayer versus conjuration. So it says, okay, 3 days of prayers and then 14 days of conjurations. And then on the it says on the 15th day, it does actually say on the 15th day in the text of the diaries. That's when authors say, well, it's 3 days of prayers and then 14 days of conjurations. Like it's like then you add like a day of meditation, and you wind up calculating it different ways. But if it's the 15th day that the spirits are appearing on, that implies that we do the prayers on the first 3 days along with the conjurations, and then just the conjurations. That's a 15-day operation. So you could read it that way. Okay. And so and so this is a case where different people look at it. It's not even clear, how many days it is. So when you go through that process, it does make stuff flow a little bit more easily in terms of working with the spirit. So I would say that it improves your operation some, but it's more like it's going from, an improvised temple setup to a full temple setup, groundbreaking thing. It's not like the Abramelin where, you have to go through the whole thing, get the Holy Guardian Angel before you do anything. It really doesn't work that way. I did Enochian for years, without having done it. And it's like, and yeah, I could conjure up whatever and stuff worked. It didn't really seem to be necessary to get the system to do things.
So for beginners, those who are like new to a lot of fluff out there, I've seen some stuff that just makes me roll my eyes. And of course, there are authors like you who actually give a very academic approach. You and one or two of my more favorite authors when it comes to this. What branch of Enochian would you recommend a beginner, as in like totally wet behind the ears, to start with? Would you recommend Heptarchia? Would you recommend the Age? Would you recommend the 19-day working? I mean, from your point of view, what would you recommend?
I start off with the Heptarchia, and that's why my book series starts there. The Heptarchia is fairly simple if you're coming over from other grimoires. Okay, so let's say you come over from like working with something, like the Heptameron or the Arbitel or something like that. Okay, so you've got spirits that are, they're planetary, they're associated with the days of the week. So Heptarchy has that. There really are only, when you get into the watchtowers that can be more complicated, I practice it much the same way. But yeah, I mean, Heptarchia is nice in that, okay, so you've got your total of 16 Spiro, you've got to learn, hundreds of spirit names or anything like that. And, once you're working with the table, you're conjuring up the Heptarchia and so on, the transition over to working with the Great Table and the Aethers, which are more complex, is much easier.
Because, speaking of which, when I started my journey into Enochian magic, I noticed something that I could never understand. That when I was a beginner, I started with, believe it or not, Donald Tyson's 19-day working. I don't know if it was the correct way to go or not. I was much younger back then. But I noticed on day 1 versus day 10, the amount of toll it would take on me just to get into the temple and do the work was progressively getting heavier and heavier. That come day 19, I practically crawled into the temple because it was just so exhausting. It was like I felt like there was like gravity pulling me down. And one thing I observed was like, of course, you're saying the call, you're scrying the aethers and stuff. I would like test myself, like, you know what? I'm going to order me a double espresso and nuke myself with caffeine so that I don't pass out. But when I would say the calls, I noticed that I would go into trance just like that. Is that a common occurrence when you're dealing with the calls or scrying the aethers? Like, is it normal for the aethers to put you in trance and like say, you're coming to us? Is this something that you've observed?
Yeah, I mean, they're actually pretty. I mean, even if you're doing a group ritual where somebody else is reading them, people get kind of trancy. I mean, the keys are really good for that. You talk about like this idea of like the barbarous names and in magic and stuff like that. The keys are one of the best pieces of sound names, words of power out there to really kind of get people. It'll work even if you're not the one reading it. It'll work if you're listening to it too in a lot of cases. So yeah, that's a pretty common thing.
I used to do that. I would scribe for some friends of mine when they would be doing the Enochian work, and because I'm an accomplished scribe, but I did primarily goetic magic. But they would have me in the temple for this, and they would start reciting the calls, and I could feel it. I could feel the whole room vibrating with it, and even without me doing any kind of prep work at all, I would go right into scrying, and I could see the whole thing as they're opening the aethers and the guards would come out. And it was actually pretty neat, and without me doing anything.
Now that you talked about goetic and Solomonic magic, it makes
it's really effective.
What I was going to ask was,
I'm sorry.
Why do you think that there would be the Enochian calls in the Goetia before at the back of the Samuel McGregor Mathers version of the Goetia? Are these two systems compatible from your opinion? I mean, would you recommend it, or you'd be like, no, let's take the other?
No, they're completely unrelated and shouldn't be mixed, in my opinion. There's no evidence of any connection between the Enochian and the Lemegeton. Crowley, the Golden Dawn had this idea of they're going to glom Enochian onto all sorts of other things, and I think that's what they were doing there. They were working off the original idea of glomming the two together. Actually comes from Thomas Rudd in the Treatise on Angel Magic in 1700, and that it's an interesting historical piece. It has a lot of really spurious things in it too. So he's got like this version of the Ensigns of Creation where he's got goetic demon names and just writes onto them and things like that. It's like they don't go together. The systems are completely unrelated. And I mean, the Lemegeton is like for mid 1600s. I mean, it wasn't even around when Dee was alive. So no, there's no connection.
I love the whole plug and play thing that people do with that. Like they figure, well, the first two Enochian keys, that's good for softening the world up, and then you can do your magic. When I was a wee tot and I got one of my first grimoires, it was a book of talismans, and they were actually using goetic sigils as talismans that you just write out and put them in your pocket. And I'm thinking later, like, oh my God, how did everybody not just ruin themselves completely doing this? Using them as talismans just to carry around. Kind of crazy. But yeah, the whole plug and play thing of saying, well, these two things are similar. Yeah. Let's do this. Well, yeah, sugar looks like flour. I want my cake to be sweeter. No flour, just sugar. It's not going to work. The chemistry is just not going to work with that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, so Enochian will syncretize a little bit with some of the Kabbalistic things, like the planetary angels, the archangels, and things like that. But I mean, these are names that are written, right on the Sigillum de Ameth, too. I mean, so D has a diagram of, the 4 angels and Anael ruling over the 4 traditional angels in the diaries. I mean, so there's a connection there, but there is no connection to the Goetia.
Which brings me to my next question. I came across a term while studying the Enochian called Enochian meltdown. And while I was looking into that, they were talking about the topic that how Enochian is dangerous and it will bring about the apocalypse. Why did this term get associated with an angelic practice like Enochian and not something like the Goetia or the Lemegeton? Like, why did they say that, oh, no, you could end the world with the Enochian? I'm like, well, why do you say that?
Well, okay, so we're going to talk about Donald Tyson because we gotta. Okay, so Tyson in the book Tetragrammaton, that doing Enochian magic is going to cause the apocalypse as described by the Millerites in the mid 1800s. John Dee had no concept of that. It comes out of Christian dispensationalism, and yeah, it dates to like the mid 1800s. So first off, the concept culturally, he has this idea. Well, Aleister Crowley, when he like scribed the Aethers, yeah, he might have caused like the 2 world wars. And I'm like, what? That is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, now where it comes from is if you read the keys, especially the call of the Aethers, there is a lot of apocalyptic sounding language in it. But remember, apocalypse doesn't mean end of the world. It means revelation. Okay, this apocalypse says end of the world and stuff. Yeah, Christian dispensationalism. Okay, and so he was not even familiar with this concept. And, people in the Renaissance were not really even familiar with this concept. So what you get is you say, oh, well, it was apocalyptic stuff. Well, if by apocalyptic you mean revelatory, sure, right? You're doing this operation. The point is to have revelations of getting in touch with these angels and doing things. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's the entire point of it. But this idea that Tyson has that, it's going to end the world is so ridiculous. I mean, I've had people like get into like flame wars with me at Enochian groups about this. How dare you not believe Enochian can end the world? I've had people come at me like that. I'm like, okay, what are you smoking? And no, I don't want any of it, kind of thing. So the deal is that, okay, so it is apocalyptic in a personal context in that, you're going to expand your consciousness. It's going to be revelatory. It's not going to, rapture your Christian neighbors who live next door. It doesn't work that way. And, that whole thing too, that's probably a misinterpretation of the Greek and one of Paul's letters. But anyway, but then Tyson, okay, it's not even clear if he believes it. And here's why. So he comes out with Tetragrammaton and he proposes this theory, okay? And, you could end the world doing Enochian magic, et cetera, and then the next book he publishes is what? Enochian magic for beginners. Okay, you're going to end the world. Okay, now beginners, here's how you start. Do that. It seems to me it's obviously got to be some kind of play. Oh, we'll make it sound scarier to sell books or something like that.
He was trying to Necronomicon.
Because it's like, I that's the only reason I can see where that. Okay, you're just trying to. I think you're just trying to be obnoxious here and make people think it's dangerous. Now, as far as the Enochian meltdown thing, okay, so that is different from the apocalypse. Mm-hmm. The term actually has to do with this supposed body of folklore of people who do Enochian magic and wind up having mental illness problems. Okay, as far as I can tell, that is not real. Okay, And here's basically, to some extent, how I know it's not real. And I'm going to go on a little segue and then come back. So back in the 1980s, I was interested in Dungeons and Dragons, okay, like a lot of nerds, right? And I subscribed to Dragon Magazine, which was the TSR magazine. And at the time, there were these groups saying, oh, Dungeons and Dragons causes suicides. It's this Christian group, okay? They said, however, what this number of suicides have been linked to Dungeons and Dragons or were people who play, okay? And so there was a person who wrote in with a letter to the Dragon. This group is saying that X number of suicides are among people who play D&D, okay? And we know from market research how many people actually play D&D. So we're going to take the number of people who play D&D and we're going to divide that by the number of suicides that this group, who probably are like overhyping everything, right, are involved. And if you do that and you do the statistics, you get a suicide rate that's half that of the general population, even if you use these exaggerated numbers. So that was one of the first lessons as a kid of how if you don't understand statistics, you don't understand life, okay? Now, in terms of mental illness and Enochian practitioners, it's important to understand, before you even dig into this, that 1 person in 4 is mentally ill in some fashion. Mental illness is extremely common. And so if you identify a person who has mental illness problems, and you're going to say, oh, this particular practice of magic has to have this causal relationship to it, you would have to show that people who practice Enochian magic have a higher incidence of mental illness than the general population, which is about 1 person in 4. I have not seen data to suggest that, 1 in 5, 1 in 3 Enochian practitioners have mental illness. I have not seen any evidence to suggest it's that much higher. There have been a quiz, and it was from Paul Foster Case to Israel Regardi. And so Paul Foster Case, he is the founder of the builders of the Edom. It's the Golden Dawn system with all the Enochian pulled out of it, basically. And who did Enochian magic and, had some kind of a mental breakdown. And this was a good friend of his, and he was all furious about how we're teaching this magic that causes people to do whatever. And he claimed, he knew of 36 people who had mental problems with Enochian. And we don't know who these people are. We know the one, and we don't know what the problems were. We don't know how severe they were. We know that he had an interest in exaggerating it. He was trying to get Regardi to pull the Enochian out of the Golden Dawn system, which Regardi didn't do. And so he eventually did it in his own system. But okay, so he had a friend who practiced Enochian magic and legitimately had some kind of a mental breakdown. We don't know if it was related to Enochian magic, though, because we know so few particulars of the case. And I mean, there have been a few other stories that have circulated on the internet, but I did a call on my blog for Enochian meltdown stories. I don't believe this is real. Give me any story you've got. And there was, I think, one guy who said he had a story of a person that he'd heard of who had not previously had any mental illness issues. One person on a blog that gets, thousands and thousands of hits, a month. It's like, well, okay, so you don't even know. And I also among people that I know who do Enochian magic, I've seen no evidence of that whatsoever.
I think a lot of the numbers are also skewed when they talk about 1 in 4 people having mental illness. I look at their definition of what they consider mental wellness, and I got to kind of lean back a little bit, because you look at what society considers to be sane, and a lot of that doesn't jive with not just the magical community. It doesn't jive with real life. Everybody's had weird things happen in their life. They've seen things, heard voices, all of that. And a lot of evocatory magic using systems are specifically designed to provoke things that you see and hear that aren't there. So, yeah, you could say that, it produces mental illness in these people, but it's not necessarily something that would be detrimental to their overall health if they do it right.
Well, I would argue that that's not really mental illness. I mean, I have a degree in psychology. I'm looking off the, like how, for example, like in the therapeutics text, like the DSM and stuff like that. And the DSM has problems. I mean, we could certainly get into that. But, one of the main criteria in the DSM is that, it's a mental illness if, it actually is causing distress and it's affecting a person's life. Just because you feel sad sometimes, that's not the same as being depressed, for example. A depression is where it becomes this debilitating thing that really, inhibits your, living the life the way you want to live it. And by those criteria, that's where the 1 in 4 number comes from. And certainly there are people who have, things that could be considered symptoms of mental illness, like, and I mean, it is interesting too, if you look at things like schizophrenia. It's like, well, there's psychic senses and there's delusions, and they are different. But sometimes a psychic person who's also schizophrenic, they can mix them up. And so it's like, so I would not say that, I mean, what we're doing as magicians is really a thing that would be mental illness, in the sense that, so yes, you are inducing communication, using your psychic senses with things and so forth. But it's just because you've got something that, or isn't physically there, or, mostly isn't physically there. Like I've used like EMF detectors during evocations, and they do jump when the spirits show up. It's kind of interesting. But, yeah, something that's mostly not there, that you could have a conversation with that. That's really not the same thing as a command hallucination. They really are different.
All right.
I mean, to an outside observer, though, it would look as if,
right,
like if you went into your therapist and you told him, "Oh yeah, I've got a half dozen dead people that hang around my house. We just chat when I'm when nothing else is going on." Yeah, a doctor would probably say you're nuts. But again, if it's not creating problems in your life, then it wouldn't really be something that. I don't know if that would count. I guess it would depend on the doctor.
That's what a therapist is going to say. Oh, I've got a bunch of dead people. I have therapy. Oh, okay. So what problems does that cause you? It's like the first thing they're going to say, because, well, they want to know if it causes problems or not.
Exactly. Well, which brings me to my next segment I'd like to bring up with you. Now we're going to be shifting to our basically advocacy segment, where you, Mr. Stenwick, are going to share with us anything you feel about the practice of magic, Enochian as a whole right now. So you can go nuts with this. Share, like, what do you think the standards are of practice nowadays? How do you see things progressing, especially in this post-pandemic era? Do you see there's a rise in people getting into Enochian magic and occultism, or are the standards dipping? I'd love to hear your take on it. Like, what's your take right now? How's Ian overall in the field?
Well, I mean, like I talked a little bit about how, I don't like authors that, go ahead and, they make their choices of what they're going to include, from the D material. And then they're like just not even remotely open-minded to other data or information. I think that's a problem. I think that if we do this stuff, we need to do it experimentally. We need to do it, as scientifically as we can. Look at, okay, so you think it's like this. All right, try it that way. Okay, what kind of probability shift do you get on your operation? And see if it's better, see if it's worse, see if it's about the same. And you should do that repeatedly. I mean, we can't really do the formal scientific method as well as we would like, because we don't have an instrument to measure consciousness. That's really the key piece that's missing. Because, okay, well, if you could measure, okay, you're at this state of consciousness, and you can relate that to this magical effect, which I think would probably be doable if you had a device like that. Well, then you could do, really formal experimentation on how this works. But that's not a device that we have. So what we have to do is we have to incorporate, take a look at our subjective experiences and say, well, that's what passes for a consciousness measure, and we kind of have to live with that. And so what that means is some people can have subjective experiences that are really significant, and the formal scientific method is like, well, that's not data, it's subjective.
Was that
but
was that one of the grounds of the creation of Operant magic? Where did that help in the creation of your Operant magic?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the whole idea of taking the ceremonial forms and just kind of like tweaking them and playing with them and looking at, well, if I do it this way, what happens? If I do it this way, what happens? And stuff like that. yeah, that's really how I developed my way of working with those otherwise standard forms like the pentagrams and hexagram rituals and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, the idea behind it is that, I mean, even in Thelema, the motto of the AA is the method of science, the aim of religion. Okay, we can't do it perfectly scientifically, but we should do it as scientifically as we can. And also, magic should be a progressive science. It should evolve. People should come up with better methods for doing things and test those methods. And then, if it works, okay, great. More people pick it up and do it. As far as the interest in the occult that people have, I'm honestly not really sure. I would say that from sales of my books, they've been kind of about the same pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. So I don't know that more people are necessarily getting into it. I don't know that less people necessarily are. Enochian has always been kind of a niche topic. I used to joke that, I'll publish my book on Enochian magic, and I'll get good sales for the first month while every Enochian magician on the planet buys it. And that's going to be like 1,000 copies, and I'll never sell another one. That's not completely true. That isn't really how it worked out. But there really aren't very many people doing serious Enochian magic, and there never really have been. Mm-hmm. It seems like a lot of the other grimoires these days are more popular. I mean, they're simpler. They just have a lot of the other grimoires that we have are books that are more like something like, mystical Heptarchia, but with like not quite as much explanation. Where it just, well, here it is, you do this, and you're just expected to like do it and see what the results are. And so it's like, it doesn't necessarily lend to, well, I must solve, the geometric summation of the tablet of Nalvage versus the tablet of the North. And if I cannot solve this relationship, I cannot do any magic. And so you spend, years trying to do something that was never intended to be done, that type of thing. The grimoires don't really lend themselves to that necessarily because they're much shorter, much simpler, and they just have basic instructions. So, I mean, taking a scientific approach as you can, with the understanding that it is possible that magic can work differently for me than it does for somebody else. Mm-hmm. So that's the other thing. It's like, I'm not going to say, oh, this is the best, probability formula that I've got. And so anybody who doesn't do it is an idiot. No, I don't do that. Because we don't have a good general theory of magic. That was one of the things I was trying to work toward with the model in like the Operant Magic book. And I have a series on my blog too about magical models that I go into a bunch of stuff like that. And the thing about it is that, if you had a general theory of magic, you could say, all right, test it against the general theory, what you're saying. And we could say whether it's some weird idiosyncrasy or it's something other people should pay attention to. Mm-hmm. We don't have that though. And so when somebody proposes something that's different but interesting, I'm like, all right, well, really, I've got to try it out to see what happens. And obviously, I don't get a chance to try out every single thing that gets proposed out there. But basically, I go with the ones that catch my eye. And if I draw conclusions from it, that's good.
Because aside from your Enochian work, one area that I would want to make our viewers aware of is really your Operant Magic articles. I've read it. I think it's brilliant. So for our viewers, can you please, what would the value be in studying and even practicing your theories on Operant Magic? Like, I know it, and I'm sure Wade does, but I'd like the viewers to hear, like, what would I get out of it? Because I mean, I liked what I saw with it. I'd like to hear it from you. Like, what's the selling point? Like, why should they go into this, and what's the benefit?
All right. So the selling point of it is it's a way of using the Thelemic and Golden Dawn forms in a way that is not the way it was taught when I was practicing it. And it makes practical magic work way better. That's why you do it. Bigger probability shifts, bigger effect. And it's a really small change. That's the thing that's interesting about it. You just change something a little bit and you get a big effect. And here's what you change. So the way, if you look at Crowley's rituals, if you look at the Golden Dawn rituals that use the lesser ritual, the pentagram, lesser ritual, the hexagram, how it is taught in most places these days is, okay, so you open with lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, lesser banishing ritual, the hexagram. And then you close your ritual the same way. Okay? Now, if you look at what those rituals do, though, the lesser ritual, the pentagram, is a microcosmic ritual. It works on your psyche. It's like, I'll do a lesser ritual, the pentagram, to clear this space because there's a Ouija board spirit bothering me. Nope, it doesn't work that way. It does not clear space. If you've got something spiritual, maybe it's like hooked into like your aura sphere of sensation, it'll cut that. Kind of like the technique like that you see like in Wicca, where you take the thame and you cut connections away. It'll do that, but it doesn't clear the space. It clears you. Okay. The lesser ritual, the hexagram, is a macrocosmic ritual, and it banishes macrocosmic forces. Okay, so what you're doing in this ritual is you're in the way it's normally taught. Okay, lesser ritual, banishing ritual, the pentagram, you're banishing yourself. Lesser banishing ritual, the hexagram, you're banishing everything else. And now I'm going to do my magical operation, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to close by banishing everything else and banishing myself. Well, okay, you just conjured a spirit, and you set that spirit off to do a macrocosmic effect. Now you're doing a macrocosmic banishing. What did you just do? Well, you just kneecapped your spirit, because that's going to diminish their effectiveness, right? And this holds up experimentally. So the trick is, the change to the form is opened with the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, the lesser invoking ritual of the hexagram. And then if you're going to do a banishing to close, you just do the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram. And in the thelemic system, you get the star ruby, star sapphire, they work the same way. If you've got some other like custom banishing ritual that operates that way, you've got like a microcosmic banishing invoking, a macrocosmic banishing invoking. You could do those, and those work the same way. My Enochian pentagram hexagram rituals in my book work the same way. And now there's a couple of things here that are interesting. So the first part of it is, well, okay, so you're clearing space where you are, and now you're doing the lesser invoking hexagram. You're pulling elemental forces into your sphere of sensation from the exterior world. And so what's going to happen is the microcosm and macrocosm, they overlap, right? Because that's how that's done. And I have a theory that this technique might have previously existed. If you take a look at the way the circle is laid out in the Lemegeton, take a look at that sometimes. So you've got hexagrams, which are the macrocosmic figure on the inside of the circle. You have pentagrams, which are the microcosmic figure on the outside of the circle. And so again, there's this kind of flipping in, that magic circle, which is from the mid 1600s. But the other thing is that when you work that way, the pattern is actually, it's a little bit more inspired by chaos magic than traditional Golden Dawn in the following way. So you're opening, okay, you're invoking the forces of nature. And then the other thing I do is, so I'll tune the space, planet, element, sign, and do the conjuration. So I build the ritual all the way up. I do the conjuration, charge, license to depart, send the spirit out. And then I don't conjure back down, which is something that is also done commonly with thelemic and Golden Dawn form. So like if I'm doing a Jupiter operation, okay, so I'll do the greater invoking ritual, the hexagram for Jupiter to tune my space. But when I'm done with the license to depart, I don't then go on, and now I've got to do the banishing ritual of Jupiter. I already did the license to depart. The spirit went. I just need to close down the operation and basically kind of you build it up and you kind of like throw it where you want it to go instead of, build it up, do it up here, and then like work my way back down. I don't do that. I found that it's far more effective to build it up and throw it. And really that structure was something actually that was kind of worked out by Carol and the Chaos Magicians. Your lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram at the end, that's banishing yourself, and that's all you're doing. I mean, that's kind of like the banishing by laughter idea if you take a look at like Liber Chaos and stuff like that, except it's being done with formal ceremonial forms. So those two changes to the way the forms work make practical magic work way better. And many people have tried it and have found that it works way better.
The best explanation that I've ever gotten of the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram came from my master, Ebony Anpu, that if you break it down, you're banishing the element of earth, which is the manifestation. He compared it to you're softening the world, kind of like a blacksmith heats his iron before he starts working on it. It makes it easier to work with because you've kind of broken the world loose. Like those old football games, we had the little plastic guys, you turn it on and it vibrates, and it makes everything softer, and everything can move around. So it just makes it easier to work, which is why you open and close with the same banishing ritual. That was just the best one, and that really stuck with me. And every time I'm going to do something, I always open and close with PLBRP, specifically for that purpose.
Yeah, and so if you're bringing in the lesser invoking ritual, the hexagram, it's like, you're not just, what you're doing is that you're basically pulling these macrocosmic forces, into your sphere of sensation and working with them while the macrocosm and microcosm are overlapped. And so that makes thought more easily flow into manifestation. So yeah, you could think of it as kind of a softening of the world sort of idea. It's like there's this kind of harder boundary between the micro and macrocosm. And when they're overlapped, that boundary becomes much more permeable to what you're conjuring.
Exactly.
So with that being said, you're saying that if you really want to have a better understanding of boosting your magic, two of the most fundamental things that a beginner could learn would be and LBR8, or the lesser rituals of both vanishing and
right.
the hexagram. Now, the question I wanted to ask you is, well, when does the greater ritual of the pentagram come in? Or these other advanced
so the greater
stuff like that?
Okay. Let me just stop. The greater ritual of the pentagram is not an advanced lesser ritual of the pentagram. They are completely different. Okay, the nomenclature is confusing. And I think it actually, I thought previously it was Old Golden Dawn. I think it actually comes out of Crowley and Lieber O. And it's like, it's confusing because these are two fundamentally different types of ritual. One is not a souped up version of the other one. Okay. So the deal is that the lesser rituals are general. So they're what you use to set up your working space and set up your operation. They set up your field, if you want to use my terminology. Okay. And so they effectively take the place of like drawing a big complex magic circle. That's basically what they do. Okay. And so then, they make this kind of bubble around you where you've got the microcosm and macrocosm interlocked. The greater ritual of the pentagram and hexagram are what you use to tune the space to a specific magical force. So you don't do a lesser ritual of the pentagram and then a greater ritual of the pentagram because it's better. No, that's not how it works. You do a greater ritual of the pentagram for an element. Okay. And so like you would do the greater ritual of the pentagram for fire. You would do a greater ritual of the pentagram for air and so on. But you don't do a general greater ritual of the pentagram. But there's one little confusing point that makes people think it might be the other way around. And that is the version of the lesser ritual of the pentagram that corresponds to Malkut on the Tree of Life, which is all four elements. So that's the version where you draw the four elemental pentagrams to the directions. But to be clear, that is not a greater ritual of the pentagram. It's a greater ritual of the pentagram for Malkut. You always do a greater ritual for something. Okay? It's not a general thing that you put in your work. And in 777, if you look at the magical powers, the mystical vision attributed to Malkut is the vision of the Holy Guardian Angel or of Adonai. So if you're wanting to do like preparation for Holy Guardian Angel work, okay, well, that's a good ritual to do as part of your sequence. Because what you're doing is you are setting your consciousness to that state in Malkut, which is going to tune you to that vision. It is not, however, I'll make a better field if I do the greater. No, it doesn't work that way. That's not it at all. And really, they should be called different things. Calling one lesser and one greater implies there's this kind of hierarchy, and there isn't. Because they're just different. Now the other thing, though, that you got to look at is the Golden Dawn had their supreme ritual of the pentagram, which is like a greater ritual of the pentagram for Malkut with a bunch of Enochian stuff glommed into it. And it's like, well, they treat that like, well, that's like a souped up, I guess, GRP Malkut or something like that. It's like, it's confusing, though. I mean, it would really make more sense if, we could come up with some better terminology for it. But I mean, the reason I use the terminology I do is that, it's what everybody knows. And if I started using a bunch of like, well, the whatever ritual, the pentagram, they'd be like, oh, what do you mean? Kind of thing. So unfortunately, we seem to be a little bit stuck with it. And so I wind up having to clarify that quite a bit, in like blog articles and stuff.
I was actually just about to ask you what your take on the supreme ritual of the pentagram was, because I've heard people say, well, I only use that because it's the supreme one. And you're like, well, why is it supreme? Well, it's got Enochian. But that was the only... If you want to do the gold...
Yeah, if you want to do the Golden Dawn Enochian system, or the Enochian system, specifically the way Crowley did it, which is mostly Golden Dawn, it can be a good ritual for working with the Enochian elements, if you're using that system and those attributions and so on. I tend to think that if somebody is a Golden Dawn person, it's like, well, you would really only do that ritual. My take would be if you're actually going to try, do it, you're actually doing the Golden Dawn Enochian. If you're doing the Golden Dawn Enochian, it does things like, it calls like the king names and the three names. And, if you look in my books, I have my own, banishing and invoking rituals that are like all Enochian. But I mean, they call on, some of those same names, the three names of God, the names of the kings, stuff like that. And that's good stuff to use to open the temple if you want to call those entities. But, as I don't really do Golden Dawn Enochian magic, and I would say if somebody isn't doing Golden Dawn Enochian magic, really it's not necessarily, the best thing to do just because it's called supreme. You know what I mean?
Amen to that.
Well, with regard to the Golden Dawn Enochian, what's your take on the pronunciation between Golden Dawn Enochian and John Dee's Enochian? Because I noticed at one point in the books, in the Golden Dawn books, they would pronounce something, say Zodo Ra Gor-El, whereas in John Dee, he said this name is just pronounced Zorge, rhymes with George. Have you noticed a difference in using that?
I use depronunciation myself to the best of my ability. Some people disagree with, John Dee's note says this and you pronounce it this way, maybe I don't have exactly the original intent. Unfortunately, the notation is incomplete and stuff like that. But just about every Enochian magician I know of over the last 20 years has pretty much abandoned the Golden Dawn pronunciation. I don't know of anybody who uses it. Oh, the TV show Supernatural used it. But other than that, I don't know of anybody who uses it. It's clunky. It's unwieldy. It's very clear that, it's one of those things that very clearly contradicts the diaries he has, his note on how these things are spelled, And the reason it was done is because some words are kind of hard for English speakers to pronounce. The example that I always use in my book is the word Vorsk. Okay, it ends with a G. So that's kind of a weird consonant combination for an English speaker. It ends with an RSG. And so in Crowley, which is the Golden Dawn pronunciation, you pronounce that Valresaji. Okay, and Crowley has that written out in Liber Hanak. One of the things I don't like about Liber Hanak, by the way, is Crowley has the Golden Dawn pronunciation written out completely phonetically. And so trying to go back to the original pronunciation, you just have to look at other sources because there's no way to tell what the original letters were. Okay, well, but you could just practice words like that. Okay. Yeah, when you start saying like Vorzge is kind of how you wind up saying it. Oh, there's like a consonant, there's like a syllable in there. There actually isn't. Think of it as, think of what your tongue does when it makes a G. And the word is actually more like Vorsk. Well, that's pretty easy in English, right? O-R-S-K, that's a more common sound. Well, the G is just you pull your tongue back a little bit, so you pronounce it Vorzg. And it sounds a little strange, but it is one syllable. And so mostly these angelic words are written the way they sound the way they're written. Sometimes what you'll see is a dash in the word that indicates that a dash separates syllables. But it's really pretty straightforward. And I think now with the pronunciation, more widely available. I mean, we have that up online now. You can just look at the British Museum scans and stuff like that. I think it really is the case that at Golden Dawn pronunciation method, it's really not a particularly good pronunciation method. And I mean, there are people like Ducat who do the thelemic version of Enochian but who also use a more D-like pronunciation and don't stretch out the syllables like that.
All right. So with that being said, we have one last. I don't know if you're still game for this, but we have the Occultech segment at the end of the show. If you have anything that you'd like to teach us, the followers, so we can put it on the show, it's at the very end. Any technique, method, up to you.
All right. Well, you know what? I will go through that operant magical method in a little more detail if people want to try that out.
Please, go ahead.
And let me give you another word of advice. In the lesser ritual, the pentagram, and it's surprising It's surprising how much of an effect this has. Here's something to try. If you are a person who does the lesser ritual, the pentagram, and you vibrate Yod He Vav He in the East, like spelling it like that, try vibrating it as a word. Yahweh, Yehovah, Yehovah, whatever you want to use. You're going to find your LRP works way better. I don't know how that crept into the canon. We did a bunch of experiments with that. Spelling don't work. If somebody's a speller, I'm like, speller. So don't spell it. All the words should be vibrated. They're all words. They're all formulas. You're vibrating them as words because they're, in some cases, notaricons and stuff like that. But, okay, you've got word, and one word in the East is, oh, I spelled this one. It's like, okay, so I want to get the attention of, G-O-D. What's going on there? But it's crept into all these different places. All these different teachers teach it. And you're going to find that if you don't do that, and as a point in Liber O, Crowley says you do Yehovah, which, Jehovah, it's not really right. It's Yahweh with the ballpoints for Adonai. Still works better than spelling it, though, because it's a word. And I think that that's an important thing to let people know about the LRP. And if you don't believe me, go ahead and try it. And, maybe you'll find, it doesn't seem like it works or something like that. But you know what? If it does work, keep using it. Now, the operant magical method basically works like this. So you're going to open again, like say, with the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, followed by the lesser invoking ritual, the hexagram. The next step of your ritual operation is going to be some kind of a preliminary invocation that identifies you with the divine. The identification of yourself with the divine is where the authority over spirits comes from, if you're going to work with spirits. And so if you can identify with the divine, well, you don't need to be initiated into some tradition to do this. It's a practice that you can do. It's about aligning your consciousness with the divine. That confers the authority. Spirits recognize it. So following your lesser invoking ritual of the hexagram, you can do something like the bornless ritual, or you could do something like the middle pillar ritual, or something like this that is bringing divine energy in. As a point about the middle pillar ritual, when you were opening with the operant field, lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, lesser invoking ritual, the hexagram, you're working with macrocosmic divine energy, not microcosmic divine energy. So that facilitates identification with the macrocosmic divine, which is what you actually need to gain authority over spirits. Crowley, meanwhile, recommended the bornless rite. That's a chopped up version of the Stele of Jehu from the Greek magical papyri. You could use versions of the Stele of Jehu itself. Blogger called The Digital Ambler has a really good article on that, talking about different ways to take the original headless rite, which is what it was originally called. And you can insert, like what you want to do for an intent and stuff like that. If you don't want to use, Crowley's version of the bornless or something adapted from Samick, but something that's truer to the original system. But anyway, that, the I invoke, the headless spirit, the bornless spirit, that is an invocation of the ultimate divine. That is the dynamic ground of being, field of consciousness that pervades the universe. That's the kind of, and Crowley liked that for authority over spirits. It does work. And a lot of people do teach it that way. So you do that. And then once you've done your preliminary invocation, you're going to use the greater ritual for the power that you're trying to do something with. So if you're doing a job spell, okay, Jupiter is good for job spells. So let's say, then you're going to do the greater ritual, the hexagram for Jupiter. That tunes your space to Jupiter. And that creates an environment into which your Jupiter spirit can more easily manifest as well, because you tune the field you've got to a quality that's harmonious with them. You also want to use some kind of a containment structure. So like Trithemian table works, Goetic triangle works, Sigillum Diamoth works. They can kind of be used interchangeably. Basically, the point is you've got a space of manifestation where the spirit is going to appear. Do your conjuration, you do your charge, you do your license to depart. I am very much in favor of being nice to spirits and not messing with them. Like, I'll do the conjuration of the chain. I don't do that crap. It's like if I have a spirit that really doesn't want to work with me, the universe at this point, there are so many other spirit names available and sigils available. I'll just find one that works with me better. It's just easier. And so, but the conjuration charge, license to depart, that's pretty much standard, the way Grimoire magic works. And then finally, at the end of your ritual, then, you will close with the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, if it's something you're sending out into the world, or you close with the Kabbalistic cross if it's something that you want to kind of stick to yourself. So what you're doing is you're leaving the field connected to you if you want the thing you just conjured to affect you, or you are doing the lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, to basically like cut the connection and send it to where it needs to go if it needs to go somewhere in the exterior world. You can use the same method for talismans. Talisman is just like a straight conjuration. You make a piece of material that is harmonious with the spirits. Like we've got an amethyst crystal for Jupiter, that's perfect, or a piece of tin is perfect. And instead of charging the spirit to do this thing for me, you charge the spirit to empower this talisman to do this thing for me. And then you have a talisman, which can be set up for more of a permanent effect. If you want something that will, always bring you good job opportunities, that's better to put in a talisman than as a spell to get me a job, because the effect is going to be ongoing. So that's a very brief overview of how I do operant magic. But I mean, if you work with these forums, take a look at it, see what you can glean from it. And I write about the stuff on the blog too.
Yeah, where can we find that? What's your blog address for the viewers? I mean, I know it. I would like to.
Yes. Yeah, it's so the blog is, I'll go IDs. It's Ananael, ANANAEL.blogspot.com.
Mm-hmm. All right. So
can we put that on the screen?
Well, I don't know how to type it up, but on the Facebook page.
Yeah, I mean, I could, I'll be pretty posting this on the blog there, and it's like wherever you could post it is fine, and I cover magic stuff. I have the rituals on there. I have some videos on there that I link to on our Leaping Laughter OTO YouTube channel, and
thank you, Ron. I just saw that.
Yeah, there it is. And I also cover some like news and weird news kind of stuff that touches on like the paranormal and the occult, in addition to technical magic stuff.
All right, so that was one hell of a segment. Thank you very much, Mr. Stenwick, being such an amazing ghost guest. We really learned so much from you. And that being said, do you have anything coming up? Any upcoming seminars, workshops, books that you release would you like the fans to hear about?
So I do have a new book coming out, which is going to be Mastering the 30 Airs. It's the third book in the Enochian series. Everybody keeps telling me, when's it coming out? When's the date? Well, I can't get a date from my publisher. It's going to be soon, though. It sounds like within the next month or two it should be available. But yeah, it's been really frustrating trying to get a date out of them. And so yeah, people keep asking, no, I'm sorry, I don't have a date. I keep asking, they won't tell me. But it should be out soon. And what that's going to cover is that covers working with the airs, the aethers, and the Enochian system along the lines of, the original D diary layout, where you've got the parts of the earth and influence over the parts of the earth. And there's some stuff in it about zodiacal magic too. The aethers are like the zodiacal piece of the system. So it's like the Heptarchy's planetary, the Watchtower system's elemental, and the aethers are zodiacal. And so that will complete my Enochian series of books, and then finally get that out, that I can work on, getting over to some other projects and stuff like that. And, possibly I may be looking at doing a fourth Enochian book that talks about some of the things that I've updated in my practice since the first one came out, things like that. We vaguely talked about maybe doing some kind of an omnibus thing of like putting the 3 titles together into one. I don't have any news on that, though. The next thing that's going to be coming up is Mastering the 30 Airs. Should be out soon, whenever they get it done. So that's where I'm at.
Definitely. Mr. Stenwick, thank you very much for your time. Wade, once again, anything you want to share with Mr. Stenwick before we wrap up?
This was all really, really informative and useful. Thank you for appearing on the show. It was really, really something. This was a good show. Big ups to our bro Belial, as always, and thanks again for your perspective on the opening rituals and Enochian in general. It's a very confusing subject for a lot of people starting out. Like you said, I don't necessarily think it's for beginners, but there are things that beginners can do with it. And I think a lot of people that would have been otherwise lost would really do well to read your books.
Well, right. I hope they will, pick up a copy of Heptarchia and check it out. I think you'll find that it's a lot more straightforward to work with and to get stuff done than a lot of other titles will suggest.
With that being said and done, Mr. Stenwick, once again, thank you very much. Looking forward to your and thank you for being on the show. My name is Robert Rubin. This is Wayne Long, and we're on Magic.tv. Good night, everyone, and have a wonderful day.